It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Liverpool at the Labour Party conference.
You don't get to choose the circumstances in which you govern. You have to govern in the circumstances in which you inherit.
But Keir Starmer will promise light at the end of the tunnel when he delivers his first conference speech as Prime Minister later this afternoon.
When I said that this Labour Party is proudly pro-business and proudly pro-worker, I meant it.
Can Labour keep businesses and the unions happy? The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, says the North faces Armageddon without high-speed rail. He'll be joining us. Here with me now, Welsh Secretary Jo Stevens, General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union Matt Rack, Political Editor of the Sunday Times Caroline Wheeler, and Politico's Deputy UK Editor Rosa Prince. This is Politics Live. Welcome to everybody. We'll be with you for the next 45 minutes. Then we'll be taking a short break, but we'll be straight back on air at 1:45 to bring you live coverage of Sir Keir Starmer's conference speech. But first of all, with our guests here, you heard Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, injecting a note of optimism, a little bit more upbeat because of all the complaints and criticism about perhaps too much doom and gloom. Well, that phrase, Keir Starmer is going to talk about light at the end of the tunnel. Let's show you some of the headlines in the papers, starting with the Daily Telegraph. It says exactly that. Light at the end of this tunnel, Prime Minister tells Britain. And The Guardian has a similar theme on the front page. It says Prime Minister vows to end gloom as Labour seeks to lift spending restrictions. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the programme. I suppose the question, Jo, starting with you, is what is the way out of the tunnel?
Well, I think what we'll hear from the Prime Minister this afternoon is about what we've achieved in 12 weeks since the election and the story of this government in terms of stabilising the economy, growing the economy and creating that wealth right across the country, from every community, for every community, so that everybody shares in it. And where we build on that decade of national renewal, get Britain building again and a brighter future.
What do you think the way is out of the tunnel?
I think people need to see an end to the cost of living crisis. They need to see a route out of that. And for workers, that means increased wages. That may take some time, but people need to see some optimism, some hope from the new government.
What do you make, since you mentioned end of cost of living crisis and also pay rises that have been agreed by the pay review bodies, first of all, recommendations taken on by the government, and yet the Royal College of Nursing, nurses rejected that 5.5% pay rise. Was that the right thing to do?
Well, I'm not going to tell them that's their democratic right as union members to make their decision, and I respect that. And the problem we've got is public sector workers have faced 14 years of unprecedented attacks on their pay and conditions, and there's a lot of anger, and there's also a lot of people struggling. So it's inevitable that people will push back against that.
What about the sort of way out of the tunnel that has been talked about, to stretch the metaphor even further? I mean, what do you make of the tone and feel of this conference? It's felt to some extent a little bit muted, maybe because some of the backdrop, of course, has been this ongoing row about donations and freebies juxtaposed with cuts to winter fuel payments. Overall, what has been your sense?
Well, I think it's not what we had expected the first conference to be, because we were expecting there to be a much more kind of celebratory atmosphere here. It is, after all, the first conference that the Labour Party has had in 14 years of them now being in power for the first time. So I think there was an expectation it was going to be a bit more jubilant. It hasn't been that way. Look, it's a difficult moment for the party. It hasn't been the best start. I think most people would agree with that. Certainly people I've seen this week have been saying that very loudly, that they are frustrated and that they are disappointed at those kind of lurid headlines that we've seen about the freebies row, about the Sue Gray tensions, etc., etc. But it's difficult also to come to a conference when you've just had a manifesto, you've just had an election, and you've just made an array of promises to the country and started introducing a very big legislative programme to then come to conference and make a whole load of new announcements. So it feels a little bit like some of the announcements are a bit thin. It's kind of narrative heavy and policy light at the moment. But as I say, overall, not exactly what I think we were really expecting from this conference.
Do you agree with that? What's been your impression, Rosa?
Yeah, my
biggest impression so far has just been the contrast to last year. So
Yeah, where it was very upbeat, wasn't it?
absolutely.
Yes.
They were really full of this sense that there was change coming and there was an election and they were going to be in government. Everyone was really tight, very excited about the future. And it's a bit downbeat compared to them. I think that the sort of reality of government has hit them hard. They did not get much of a honeymoon, partly because of the winter fuel payments, partly because of the riots, which obviously were a really tough time for the country. And although they've almost dealt with those two things differently, one much more successfully than the other, they seem to be reeling a little bit from it. And I don't think they've managed to grab hold of that narrative that Caroline's been talking about so far.
Jo, is there also an issue with plenty of talk and discussion and blame being pinned on previous Conservative governments about the poor economic legacy that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves say that the government has inherited? But you've also inherited a very low level of trust in politics. For a multitude of reasons, and that you haven't been able to distinguish yourselves enough in that regard from what's gone before.
Well, just taking up on the point that Rosa made about the mood of conference, I mean, I don't recognise that at all. You should have come to Welsh night on Sunday night. I mean, we know
We've
how
been
to
the wrong
celebrate.
parties, clearly.
But, our manifesto, the first line was that we will bring economic stability. We had to be trusted by the public. Keir Starmer changed the Labour Party. He rebuilt trust with the British public. That's why we won the election. And that's why trust in politics is so important. And we've got to deliver on those missions and those promises that we made in our manifesto. It's undoubtedly going to be difficult, or more difficult, because of the economic inheritance. But the fact is, we've got to be honest with the public about what the public finances look like.
Right, and you've done that, most definitely. But if we just pick up on something you've said and look at the headline here in the Daily Telegraph, it says, this is John Curtis, who is the elections expert, the writing's already on the wall for Labour's floundering government, which is quite a statement. He says Keir Starmer's loveless landslide was always volatile, and his weak political antennae has seen his party sink in the polls. And as you say, trust from the British public, they gave you a landslide, but was that because they fell out with the Conservatives? They'd had enough of them, but they haven't embraced Keir Starmer and the Labour government yet.
We've been in government for 12 weeks. We've done a huge amount already. House of Lords reform, abolition of hereditary peerages, renters reform bill to end no-fault evictions, setting up GB Energy, the railways legislation to bring it back into public ownership has already gone through the Commons.
And yet your poll ratings have gone down. People haven't seen it.
Judge us on the delivery on our missions at the next election. We've been in government for 12 weeks. We are dealing with a dreadful inheritance. The Tories went on about their inheritance for 10 years. Give us 10 weeks to talk about
it. And that was at the time of the crash,
it.
obviously, in 2010. But what do you think about this issue of a landslide? Yes, in terms of the number of seats, but in terms of support, it was also striking at the time of the election that it was 34% vote share. I think one of the statistics was it was the lowest vote share on the highest number of seats.
I think it's important that the Labour government gets this point right, because I think there was a very significant anti-Tory mood at the election, and that's very significant. And I think the challenge for the incoming government is that question of hope. People have elected a new government with a very big majority. They want to see that government offering, and quite quickly, that their lives are going to change for the better. And I think that's where I think there have been some challenges in the first few weeks.
So what do you want to hear? What do you think people want to hear in this speech?
They want to see I think they want to see that a Prime Minister who's optimistic, who can say, I've got a roadmap that will solve your problems in terms of paying your bills, paying your rent, a future for your children, decent homes and public services, but also how he's going to deliver that.
Right.
And rather than simply saying things are pretty bleak and they could get bleaker. That I think, and I think the press coverage today suggests that they have picked up that point, but it needs to be turned into policy and delivery.
Jo?
Yeah, well, let's see what the reaction is after the speech this afternoon. I think what the Prime Minister will do will tell a story of what this government is going to be about. And this is about bringing everybody along on that journey, that national endeavour to fix Britain. We'll get Britain building again, we'll get wages up, we'll get standards of living up, and by the end of it, then people will judge us at the next election.
I mean, do you agree with that headline, the writing's on the wall already for Labour's floundering government?
I don't think John Curtis agreed with the headline. I heard him on the Today programme this morning saying, oh, it wasn't quite what I meant. But I think he does have a theory that Labour did very well in one part of their mission, which was to be trusted by the electorate to be a competent government, but really failed quite badly before the election in making that the positive case, making the public really love the party, really feel invested in this new government. And I think I would agree with him that they didn't do that before the election. They haven't managed to do that so far in these first months, but perhaps Joe's right. Perhaps this speech is going to be the speech when Keir Starmer seals the deal with the British public.
Well, that is quite a pressure, isn't it, on
No pressure,
the Prime Minister, as is always the case. I mean, just to give you some of the detail from the piece that was actually written, or the interview that John Curtis actually gave. Yes, Labour won just 35% of the vote in an election where only 3 in 5 voted. Never before has a party won an overall majority with so low a share of the vote, but they did get that massive landslide. Now Sir Keir's net satisfaction rating is back down to -21 from a high of +7 immediately after the election. That is a sort of a very quick fall, no honeymoon whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think what that comes down to is, I think, you know, I completely accept what you're saying about the need to sort of tell the story to the country today about what you're trying to achieve, but I don't think that that's happened yet. And I think exactly what you were saying, there have been lots of promises, lots of legislation going through the House that are going to make big changes, but actually at the moment nobody feels those changes, nobody feels better off. The sort of positive energy that was around the sort of change mission when we had the general election has kind of seeped away, because, you know, if you think about that first speech that Sir Keir Starmer gave just after the riots, he actually said, sorry, things aren't going to get better, things are going to get worse first. And I think that, you know, if you're an electorate who's just voted for change, you know, has just seen a new government coming into power, that's actually quite a difficult pill to swallow. But I agree, they've clearly picked up on the frustration amongst some within the party, and they want to give some sort of sense of what the pot of gold is at the end of the rainbow. But I don't know if they're going to be able to do enough to explain that to people, and that's what I really want to hear the nuts and bolts of that.
Joe?
Sorry, I couldn't really hear Caroline very well, sorry, but I think about this story, the storytelling and giving people hope. You know, that's what I think will come out of the speech this afternoon. There'll be lots of details in there, but this is about setting out how we go from here to that new Britain where we are fixing the foundations, creating the growth, sharing the wealth.
Right, but what's it going to make Keir Starmer to say today to persuade journalists like you two to report on the sorts of things that Joe Stevens is setting out, rather than Wahid Ali's donations, influence at Downing Street, freebie clothes and spectacles? What's going to have to shift?
I think I saw some really interesting polling yesterday showing that one of the things that the voters, well, the thing that the voters are most upset about is the winter fuel payments cut. And I think if he doesn't say something about pensioners and bring something to the table for them, that he probably will be continued to be punished for it. So I think that will be the central thing. And then this economic message. Is there going to be some jiggery-pokery ahead of the budget to maybe ease the finances a little and make people feel a bit better about their own personal finances?
I think the winter fuel thing has gone down very badly. It's gone down. The trade unions are very. We discussed it at the Trade Union Congress just a couple of weeks ago. It's gone down very badly with people who voted Labour, and it's gone down very badly with people in the public generally. And it's been handled badly, frankly.
Oh, well, it's been handled badly. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, it's a decision that we didn't want to make. Nobody comes into government to make that sort of decision.
We've heard that, with all due respect.
But,
honestly, has it been handled badly?
That is the point. I think we need to get across the issue around pension credit more strongly. You know, pension credit is worth up to £3,900 a year. That's significantly more than the winter fuel allowance. And we know we've got 880,000 pensioners who are eligible that don't receive it. I want to make sure that every single one of those pensioners gets that. And we've protected the triple lock, which means that state pension for most pensioners will be £1,700 more by the end of this Parliament.
Why was it handled badly?
Well, I think the measures that Joe is setting out of how do you make sure that people are claiming the things they're entitled to could have been done in advance of changes to the payments that's been withdrawn. And you know, you can predict how this is going to play out in certain parts of the media over the winter. People die of cold every winter anyway, and this will make it worse, unfortunately. So and that will not play out well for Keir Starmer. And I don't wish that on them. I want to see the Labour government succeed, but we have to face up to the reality of what's gone badly in the first few weeks of the government.
I'm just going to break in. Let me just show you this BBC News headline, because this, of course, is a story and a crisis that has been playing out in the Middle East. Thousands flee homes as Lebanon says more than 550 people killed in Israeli strikes since Monday. We have now had confirmed that John Healey, the Defence Secretary, has left the conference, gone back to London, and is going to be chairing an emergency cabinet briefing about evacuating British nationals from Lebanon. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, had already encouraged British nationals to leave while there were commercial options. But this is becoming even more intensified, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There were discussions on Friday about the contingency arrangements that would be needed in the event that this situation did escalate, and obviously that has happened over the course of the last few days. It was interesting, I spoke to a very senior minister only yesterday about this situation, and they were saying this really was the kind of 10 minutes to midnight scenario for them. They thought that this was one of the more worrying developments that had been happening, despite the fact that, you know, there has been a kind of gradual escalation since those atrocities on October the 7th. So I think it is a moment where they are going to have to take this very seriously about getting, as I understand it, about 8,000 British nationals out of, and their dependents out of Lebanon. I think about 8,000 have already left in the past month. As I understand it, there are warships on standby if they need to get them out in a different way, but obviously the best way to get them out at the moment is on those commercial airlines. But
right. Well, this is going to be something that's going to be, well, it is a big challenge at the forefront of the Prime Minister's mind, no doubt, also as he addresses conference today.
Yeah, so the Hamas attacks of October 7th overshadowed last year's conference.
Yeah.
And I remember speaking to John Healey, funnily enough, the next day, and him saying that the thing that cannot happen is for this to escalate and to become a wider Middle East conference. And of course, that is what seems to be developing. It will make events, to be honest, here in Liverpool in the bars and the fringe meetings seem a little trivial, perhaps, compared to what could be, you know, a really serious challenge to all of us, and perhaps lasting for many years to come. So, yeah, Keir Starmer is off to the States. He's going to be talking with fellow world leaders, and this will be one of the most important things they'll be discussing.
Rosa Prince, thank you very much for joining us, and enjoyed the speech this afternoon. Let's just show our guests this headline, and our viewers and people gathered here around us on the set in Liverpool. Unions and Labour still wrangling over workers' rights. What are you two wrangling about then, Matt?
Well, actually, I'm very positive. In general, I'm very positive about this element of Labour's programme. The workers' rights issue and a first significant improvement in workers' rights and trade union rights in generations, I think is very welcome. It's something that we've explained to our members in advance of the election and made a basis of our case for why they should vote Labour. So I want to be very positive about that. Equally, it's inevitable we're going to discuss the detail of that, and the unions want to see the final detail. And we get on. Well, there's all sorts of rumours that the media starts about day one rights and so on. And yes, we want.
I don't think it's the media that starts it. Well, it might be coming from government or.
Well, someone plants stories in the press, and then we end up with a big debate about it. There are questions about day one rights and what does that mean precisely, and we do need to know what that means precisely.
What does it mean, Jo Stevens?
What,
because
day one rights?
yes, because and are they happening? Because we have had endless toing and froing on our programme, Politics Live. There will be day one rights, and then no, actually, it's not going to be until 6 months. There'll be a probation period. What is it?
We've always had probation periods. In any job that you go to, we've had probation periods. But there will be rights from day one in relation to specific things. But this is about saying to businesses that you cannot unfairly dismiss somebody. It's not about saying you can't dismiss somebody. You can do it fairly if you follow procedures. That's why it's called unfair dismissal. Nobody should be sacked from a job unfairly. And will just set that out in legislation. But I think this is a great, there are loads of businesses.
What's the difference? I mean, if you don't mind saying, what already exists?
No, the difference is if you sack someone, you've got to follow a proper, fair procedure to do it. And if you don't do that, that's why it's called unfair dismissal. So nobody should be unfairly dismissed.
I think the difference may emerge that we don't see why those rights can't start from day one, including during a probationary period, and people on probation can be fairly dismissed as long as people follow the act reasonably.
Right. Well, let's get your view. Craig Beaumont from the Federation of Small Businesses. What do you understand it to be and what would you like it to be? Is it day one so that literally employees arriving at businesses of your members will have those rights from the minute they step over the threshold? Or is there, as you understand, a probationary period?
Well, we don't know, and that's it. One of the key points is there's no list of measures yet, including this one, published by the government. So we're awaiting the bill, which is due in the next, couple of weeks, right, by October the 13th, and then hopefully we'll see a list of measures. I think day one rights is an issue depending on how you present it. So presenting it in the very moderate way there is good, but if you talk to small business owners right now, one of the biggest fears as you set up a small business is of being sued, making a mistake, being taken to a tribunal, and the tribunal system in the UK is uniquely backlogged with 500,000 cases, which means it takes 2 years. And I think recruitment, you can, I don't know if you've all recruited, I certainly have. You can make mistakes when you recruit. Something goes wrong and you need an out. It has to be done fairly and properly, but what you don't want to do is have vexatious claims that then go straight to the tribunal and then you're held for 2 years with a potential, and it is happening right now, even before the 2-year
I
period.
ran a business before I became an MP, and I ran a business that was unionised, where we had proper procedures in place. And, I have dismissed people in the past, but you do it through a fair and open procedure. If employers are doing things properly, they have nothing to fear from this legislation whatsoever.
But that's a big business, right? Because you are unionised, which means it's a different sort of business.
But why should it be different whether it's a big or small business? It's about treating people fairly and with respect at work. And whether you're a small business owner or a big business owner, that's what you should be doing.
And Labour get this, it's understanding the difference between a small business and a large one. Because if you've got a corporate, like BBC, 22,000 employees, it will have a policy, it will have piles, I'm expecting, of policy documents that it then applies. But on things like flexible working, let's just pick that one, they'll have a policy document and they'll apply it equitably across 22,000 employees. Your small business, your florist, your coffee shop, 4 people, they do flexible working. 89% of them do flexible working. Do they have flexible working policy documents? No. So there's a problem about formalisation. So basically all we're asking is take the package, make it work well for small businesses, no exemptions, we try just get the package right and then apply it in the proper way to both sets of businesses.
I think I presume you're not arguing that small businesses should be exempted from acting reasonably in relation to their employees. And that's all we're saying, that employers should act reasonably in relation to their employees. And as follows, yes, people may be dismissed during probation periods. What we're saying as trade unions is as long as people follow reasonable practice and act within the law. That seems perfectly
That's fair. Reasonable. And then you look at how it's applied. Do you need a policy document? How do you write one? So do you write to 5 million small businesses in the country and say, you need to have these following 10 policy documents on X, Y, Z? No, I don't think that's what will happen.
Organisations like ACAS provide guidance on all of those things which employers can literally take off the shelf and apply, even if they're a small business.
How bad and how difficult has it been then in terms of employee rights up until now?
I think the experience of in unionised
with small businesses.
Well, I work in a unionised
but you must have some experience.
Yeah, I think the concern is that there is a big difference between unionised workplaces and non-unionised workplaces. But in unionised workplaces, people will tend to have formal arrangements, and that protects the employee much better. I think the legislation would extend that more widely in the economy.
I mean, really, the risk is about risks and costs. So when a small business owner decides to create a job, he or she is wondering, is this the right thing to do? And all things going through their mind. What you don't want to do is make it a riskier decision, and therefore they won't create the job. I always see this as a Venn diagram. You've got improving workers' rights, you've got tackling economic activity, and you've got economic growth. You need something that does all three. You shouldn't do one and then one of the others falls away.
Right, well, it's been... Yeah,
if people are happy at work, if they're treated fairly, I don't think anybody sets up a business in order to treat their workers badly. I really don't think they do. But this is about making sure that there's a level playing field, that people do things properly, they act within the law, and better productivity will come from this, because it's a relationship then that is on a much better footing.
But it is about protections on both sides, of course. I mean, Caroline, this in the Financial Times says UK employers to retain right to place new hires on 6-month probation. Listening to this very interesting discussion on it, who's sort of winning this argument? Rachel Reeves saying we're going to be pro-business and pro-worker, and I'm sure you can do both.
my sense, having recently interviewed the Chancellor, which we published on Sunday, is that she's very aware of the concerns of businesses, and she was actually went to a lot of lengths to say very clearly that businesses should have nothing fear from these regulations. But we know that there has been a bit of toing and froing between Johnny Reynolds, the business secretary, and obviously Angela Rayner, who's bringing forward these proposals, which I think have to come through within, the next 19 days or so. So I think there definitely is a debate happening within Cabinet about this. And of course, there is also a debate, which was very evident in the interview that I did with her, even about flexible working. I think the Chancellor is very concerned about the kind of big businesses like Amazon and JP Morgan coming out and actually saying, no, we don't think people working from home is the right way to proceed and isn't necessarily going to drive productivity, which of course is going to be a driver of growth. And she said to me very clearly that she's in the office 5 days a week and she expects her staff to be led by her example.
Well, as you say, perhaps a pointed remark there in terms of the mission for growth and productivity. Let me just show you this headline in The Sun. Visa blitz. Firms flouting visa rules will be banned from hiring foreigners, warns Sir Keir Starmer. We think we're going to hear a little bit more about that perhaps in the speech this afternoon. How easy is it for your members, Craig, to establish the visa credentials of someone working for them?
So they really struggle with the visa system. I mean, because it's small businesses, we tend to recruit people who are local and have the right to work. So we don't tend to want to go to other countries, ask for, procure people and bring them back. That's not our business model. So large corporates will have a different view that do that. I think you need to work out, we've got 700,000 people who are economically inactive who could be in work. So how do you get those into the jobs market and into jobs? Because work is brilliant. It's the absolute good thing for growth. It's good for people. So you need to, rather than look overseas, we do need to look at how do you help people into work. And it's small businesses that do that. It isn't the big corporates and, it isn't them, it's us.
Joe or Matt? Yeah, sorry.
It seemed a bit of a strange headline. I mean, presumably if people are breaking the rules, then the authorities will act against those people who are breaking the rules.
Yeah, but listening to what Craig was saying, it's not always that easy to establish what the rules are and whether people are presenting the right sorts of documentation.
No one knows are for authorities to enforce, it should be made easy for employers to understand whatever the visa regulations that apply, and then there clearly will be authorities there to enforce those. I think the debate is to what degree are various skill shortages in the economy, and how do we address those, and how much do people need?
Well, how do you think they should be addressed?
Well, I think we hear probably from across the spectrum that in certain areas there are specific skill shortages and people need to be able to recruit from across the world.
Right, and so obviously that means levels of net migration may still remain high for quite some time. I don't know what Sir Keir Starmer will say about that. Do you think there should be a level of net migration?
Well, I think some net migration is inevitable, but I think Matt is right about this piece about skills and linking it into the question of net migration. We had 4 elections, I remember, where the Conservatives promised to bring down net migration at every single election. And what happened was it trebled under their watch. They broke the system. Sure. And now we have very high levels of net migration.
And you want to bring them down or
our
keep them
skills,
the same?
We've announced the creation of Skills England. We want to make sure that kids coming out of school, young people, are gaining the right sort of skills for the jobs and industries of the future. I was in South Wales last week at a compound semiconductor plant, so microchips that go into our mobile phones and into fighter jets. They are desperate for people with those sorts of skills. This is what we need to drive those industries so that people can have well-paid, well-skilled jobs that raise their standards of living.
One of the biggest problems, as you know, are the number of what the government and various institutions call people who are economically inactive, or they are unable to work because they are long-term sick. Now, Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, she said this actually when she was the shadow Work and Pension Secretary. Life on benefits will not be an option under Labour. So how are you going to solve that?
This is about helping people back into work, so people who are able to work to be helped and given the support to get back into work so that they can, raise their families and have a better standard of living. We've got this, particularly I think post-COVID, over the age of 50, a big cohort of people.
There's also young people. Quite a lot of young people who haven't gone back
into work. But it's about putting the help and support in place for them to do that.
Right. Is it more carrot and less stick? How should it be run? This is a difficult issue, and it's going to be very, very hard to get increased productivity unless it's solved.
Well, I think it relates actually to the earlier discussion on workers, what work should look like. Work should be rewarding for people, and part of the package needs to make work rewarding and fair and well paid. And I think something that people want to do and people enjoy doing and benefit from. I really hope that what we don't see from the government, I mean, okay, it's a press headline that we have, yet another attack on so-called scroungers. I hope that's not what we're going to be seeing.
Well, I mean, that is the headline in the Times. Labour to crack down on benefit fraudsters. What do you make of that language?
Well, clearly, if people are committing fraud, they should be tackled. I think the concern about how those in the media, how that's sometimes portrayed, is it becomes that people who are, for whatever reason, on benefits become tarnished by that, and that's unfair.
Right. We'll say goodbye to you, Craig, but thank you very much for joining us. Just to talk a little bit more about the language, of course, it's reminiscent to some extent of George Osborne, a former Chancellor, saying it's unfair for people who are going out to work every day while others sit at home with the blinds shut and they are living a life on benefits. Is that the sort of rhetoric that this government is going to use when talking about benefit fraudsters?
No, not at all, and that's not what I read that headline as saying. For me, this is no different to tax avoidance. So, if you are not paying the tax
avoidance,
or if you're not paying the tax that you should pay, and if you are claiming benefits fraudulently, you are cheating the public purse out of money that could go into our hospitals and schools and transport and our public services. And I think most people would expect a government to make sure that there is none of that going on, or as little of that as possible.
And you would support that sort of...
Yeah, I think it's reasonable. People should not be defrauding the system. I think all the evidence shows that if as much effort was put into tackling unpaid tax, that would be far better for the economy and society more generally.
I mean, what do you make of the fact that this has been briefed, obviously, as part of the speech this afternoon, back to this issue? I mean, all governments, of course, want to tackle fraudulent system when it comes to benefits.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's also part of a kind of wider issue that we're going to have to face, because at the end of the day, there is this 22 billion black hole. We haven't heard very much yet from the government about how they're going to plug that black hole. And the welfare budget is one of those areas where you can raise or certainly find some funds. And certainly one of the people that they've actually employed to sit as part of the advisory group looking at this is an academic called Paul Gregg, who actually worked with the last Labour government and actually was one of the people that kind of came up with some of the plans, which were the precursor to the universal credit. So there definitely is quite a lot of thinking going on about this and how you can make savings from that welfare budget.
Well, let's move on and have a look at this headline in the Daily Telegraph. North faces Armageddon without HS2 links, says Andy Burnham. Well, by great coincidence and planning, here is the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. What do you mean Armageddon?
Transport, it's we're at the end of days, because what we're currently facing is when HS2 opens to Birmingham from London in the early 2030s, it'll be the West Coast Main Line that those HS2 trains have to carry on up north on. And can you imagine? I mean, you can't even travel on the West Coast Main Line now without it being chaos. If it's going to be taking HS2 trains, I mean, what a statement that will make about the country, though. You get this amazing service in the southern half, and then you trundle up the northern half. Fewer seats. The trains are going to have to be shorter because the platforms won't be able to take the HS2 trains, and they'll have to go slower because the Pendolinos can tilt around the corners, but the HS2 trains won't be able to do that. We'll have a worse service by the middle of this century, when the north of England has all of these promises of better trains.
Right, well, you might have convinced everyone here on the panel, Andy Burnham, with that, but Keir Starmer told us, the BBC, in January this year, he would not revive the northern leg of HS2. It's over.
Well, to be honest, that headline's misleading, because I'm not calling for that. HS2 was gold-plated, and I'd even said to the last government that we'd be prepared to talk about changes to it. What we're saying is there just needs to be a new link between the point where HS2 ends north of Birmingham and where it will join the new Liverpool-Manchester Railway in Cheshire. That's what we're calling for, a new link, because otherwise we'll have an anti-growth policy here. The M6 is full. The West Coast Main Line is full.
It's capacity.
So we'll
isn't
see the economy of the West Midlands and the economy of the northwest of England go into reverse if we don't put in that transport capacity to support growth.
How much money do you want?
It's about investment, though, isn't it? It's about investment
But what are we
in growth.
What are we talking about? It's money.
It will
basically.
it will be repaid, but
Yeah.
it will
Yes, but
repay
what
through a
are we
bigger
talking about as
economy
upfront?
in the northwest and in the West Midlands.
I understand that. What are we talking about, though, in
Well,
terms of upfront investment?
We are talking about, I would say, for that line, which would go through Staffordshire, you're not talking of I think you're talking about a 60-kilometre line. It's not huge. To complete the jigsaw, you'd be talking, depending on how you did it, but you'd be talking single-figure billions, possibly double figures, but not many more than that. And that would be repaid within years for the rest of and then the rest of the century, the benefits of bigger growth in those areas would multiply.
Are you convinced? Are you going to argue for Andy Burnham's, let's say, £6 billion to stop Armageddon transport-wise in the north in Cabinet?
I mean, the message I just taken from Andy there is like, what a catastrophic inheritance we've had. You know,
all right. I get that, but he's talking. He's talking about this government.
Yeah, this is important, Joe, because HS2, the absolute scandalous waste of money, the way in which that project's been run, managed, and controlled by the last government.
All right.
That's
So
the
should
sort
this
of thing we're
government
going to have
reinstate
to
that northern leg?
But that's what we're having to deal with. All
Right.
that money
Okay.
wasted, that transport
So you
money
can't
gone,
do HS2.
promises made, there's no
Andy
money
Burnham's
to pay for
accepted
it.
that. Are you going to argue his case to avoid transport Armageddon in the north in Cabinet?
So I'm sure Andy's talking to the Transport Secretary about what he
Joe,
wants
really
for the north,
encouraging-
like I'm talking about what I need in Wales. All
And
of us
really
we want to
encouraging
see it.
discussions we're having. And actually, we're going to try and help. It's not just a straight ask for money. What we can say is, how about a land value tax? Infrastructure lifts the value of land. I helped put the funding package together for Crossrail in London. And it was good in some ways, but I made a mistake. I should have put in a land value tax, because where the Elizabeth line has gone in, land values at the stops has gone like that.
Well, I think Rachel
and
Reeves
we
was one
should have captured some of that money to help pay for the infrastructure that caused that land value uplift. We should do the same on this railway line. Let's take some of that to pay for the infrastructure.
Well, Matt Rack, do you think it's time the government perhaps looked at the borrowing rules? Andy Burnham made a very, very impassioned plea there for upfront money that will be repaid. Is there an argument now for Rachel Reeves to look at that?
Yeah, and I think that was discussed in conference this morning on infrastructure. And the unions have very much been making the case that we need to be investing in infrastructure, and if that needs revised borrowing rules, then that needs to be considered. I live near the Elizabeth line. It is an amazing piece of technology, and it has been proven to be a success. And what it shows me is what could happen to this country if we actually begin to think properly years ahead, decades ahead, as we should be. So I echo what Andy's saying there.
Well, this headline in the Financial Times, Andy Burnham, Rachel Reeves, stokes borrowing rules debate with signal on higher capital spending. Should it be rethought? And should the Chancellor look again?
Well, I'll be honest, I'm encouraged by that headline. Growth, the defining mission of this government.
Yeah.
And great, and I absolutely believe that. Growth comes from hope. Growth comes from the feeling that things can get better, that people then have the confidence to come and invest because there's hope that things will improve. Growth comes from planting seeds, and that comes from that investment in the long-term prospects of this country. I believe the northwest of England could be a much bigger economic force in the 21st century than it was in the 20th, if it's not held back like it was by previous governments. Other governments, including the one I was in, used the Green Book to say, oh no, you can't have that transport investment up here. We'll do it down south, but not up here. Well, that's got to come to an end, and I hope this will be the government that does end it.
Right. Caroline, let's just put that to one side just for the moment, although it is very much part of the debate now, because if you want growth and investment, then maybe you do have to look at borrowing more money, but there'll be critics of that too. In terms of the speech, as we look ahead, it's not that far away. How big a reset is this going to be?
I think there's obviously a momentum behind the sort of positive message. It's very clear, particularly after that consumer confidence survey last week, which suggested that there'd been a fall in the confidence of the nation, in the kind of prospects of our economic recovery. We definitely need to hear a more positive and upbeat message about the future. The difficulty of doing this reset is that in but a few weeks' time, we are going to have a budget that we are being told is going to be painful, it's going to be brutal. So it's difficult to sort of balance those messages between the optimism and hope and at the same time telling us that we're going to have to wait for that kind of shiny future, because at the moment we have this £22 billion black hole which is kind of sitting on top of us like a rain cloud.
Right, sitting on top of you like a rain cloud in terms of light at the end of the tunnel. You've been very clear what that looks like. It's transport in the north.
Well, I mean, I listen carefully to Jo, and she's right, of course, that the inheritance is poor, and it's not fair of me to come up with shopping lists and throw them at the government and say,
that's your job, isn't
well,
it?
it's a bit of that. It's a bit of my job, but it's also my job to understand the circumstances that the Chancellor is working within and put clever proposals forward. And here's the cleverness about devolution. We're moving to a single place-based pot. And my argument to the Chancellor is, if you spend money through that, you can join the dots between different things and you can get more for public money when you spend it in that way. So, for instance, we believe if you gave us the employment support budget, took it off DWP, gave it to Greater Manchester, we would turn Job Centre Plus centres into Live Well centres. We'd link them to our local community and voluntary sector, our adult education budget, our employers. I guarantee to you, we would get more people into work for this government if we did that localised employment support.
Good luck at the Treasury. Good luck with your negotiations, no doubt, with Rachel Reeves. You are a seasoned, let me put it that way, Labour politician. You're one. Yes, I think it is a compliment. Yeah, it is a compliment. You're one of the few Labour politicians who has been in government before, and you have some experience of what it is like. What would your advice be to have avoided some of the poor negative backdrop to this conference when it's come to donations, rows over freebies, splits at the top in Downing Street?
I wouldn't be so po-faced as to say the governments I were in didn't have the same things coming into conference.
But have you been disappointed by this on the back of a big landslide?
It was always the way. There's always Westminster controversies that follow the Westminster set as they come out to places outside, and these rumble on at the start of conference. Conference then often resets the feeling, and I think that's happening at this conference. I thought the Deputy Prime Minister made the best speech on housing that I've ever seen from the platform at a Labour Party conference. It was fantastic. Speaking from real experience as somebody who had the security of affordable housing.
And you're listening, and you're obviously listening very closely, but what about the public out there who are still focused on these scandals, these rows that have been underlying and actually here at the centre? How do you stop those headlines?
Well, I would say to the government, obviously learn from them as we did when we were in government. Things will happen, learn from them quickly, take on board, make changes as they said that they would. That's the way to do it, but get back onto the big picture, get back on what this government's driving mission is. I'm hearing at this conference it is going to be about fixing the housing crisis. I think that would be a really clear, defining mission, because you can't have anything in life without a good home. A good home helps, good housing helps fix the health service.
Do you think there need to be changes that you have talked about within Downing Street, for example, so that Keir Starmer can get a grip,
Well,
as he
can I
said?
tell you one change I really don't want to see, and that's anything that pushes Sue Gray aside. Sue Gray has been an absolute breath of fresh air for the mayors and for devolution in England. She has really brought us to the centre of things. The government won't achieve their missions unless we're really empowered to go for growth and to build those homes, to get more people into work. And Sue has really brought things together so that we're really at the heart of things. And I would say that I would like to see the departure of people from Downing Street briefing against Sue Gray, and I would like Sue to be absolutely working with us to really bring everything we've talked about in the last few minutes into being. So that's the change I would like to see.
So she's been a huge positive. You think it's unfair, all these briefings?
I mean, I'm not seeing the everyday of what goes on. All I can tell you, and I think I speak for all of the other English mayors on this, because we talk a lot about it, Sue Gray changed things. She really brought huge positivity to this whole agenda, coherence to the government's missions and how mayors can help deliver them. And that's why she will be a really important force in this government, and I strongly support her.
Well, that's Andy Burnham. You couldn't have been clearer. We'll pick up on some of that in our next programme. Please join me in 45 minutes' time. Bye-bye.